Ready?
Hit it!
Hello everyone and welcome to Twice Nightly the podcast with Maria Lovelady
And Michael Alan-Bailey, a podcast that aims to bring everything variety out of the wings and into the limelight.
So what are we waiting for?
Let's raise the curtain
And start the show! Coming up on today's show, we talk to theatrical photographer to the stars, Simon Annand.
We talk to Simon about an array of fabulous subjects, from Ken Dodd and Spike Milligan to Joan Plowright and Daniel Craig.
And find out which legendary jazz musician blew his instrument straight in Simon's face.
Woohoo!
Guesses on a postcard.
Welcome back, everyone. And today we're going to talk about something completely different in today's episode. We delve into the world of theatre, more close-up and personal than we ever have before. Today, we're going to take a look at some of our favourite performers, not from the audience, but from their dressing rooms.
Today's guest is photographer Simon Annand, whose body of photographic work includes The Half and Backstage, featuring behind-the-scenes photos of actors at their most vulnerable and one of the most crucial parts of their process, their time in the dressing room before the show, a time we know very well. So if you would like to get your hands on Simon's books, which why wouldn't you, because they're fantastic, Maria, tell us where are Simon's books available as we do a shameless plug.
Simon's books are available at Foyles, Waterstones and Amazon, and we can't recommend them enough.
Now, this episode must hold some kind of record for the biggest clangers and name drops that we've ever had on this podcast. Would you agree?
I would agree, and that's saying a lot because we've had quite a few clangers.
Is that your best clanger impression?
That was me trying to be a clanger.
I mean,
Can you do a clanger? Can you do a clanger? Go on.
Well, I thought they're more kind of whistly, aren't they?
Sometimes the pitches you reach, you probably, they could probably understand you.
I am actually part clanger.
Anyway, let's get back to Simon.
Back to Simon and his clangers. So Simon isn't name dropping at all. These just happen to be the fabulous subjects that he's photographed in his time. And he's photographed just about everyone from Sir John Gielgud to a young Daniel Radcliffe and everybody in between. The subjects of Simon's photographs have included, right, are you ready for this? Anthony Hopkins, Kate Blanchett, Daniel Day-Lewis, Judi Dench, Vanessa Redgrave, Jake Gyllenhaal, Jim Broadbent, Jeremy Irons, Glenda Jackson, Jude Law, Charlotte Rampling, Michael Gambon, Maggie Smith, Martin Sheen, Felicity Kendall, Orlando Bloom, and Ralph Fiennes. What a list!
My goodness, the Oscars are clanging.
The Oscars are literally clanging. So let's start then talking a little bit about your relationship with Simon and how you met him, because obviously we got to talk to Simon because of you, because you work alongside him. Tell us a little bit. It's like you're the guest now, isn't it? Like you're in the hot seat. Tell us a little bit about how you came to meet Simon and about some of the projects you've worked on together.
Oh, Simon. Hello, Simon. So Simon and I met because I went to get my headshots taken by Simon, and I would thoroughly recommend Simon to any actors or business people that need anyone that needs a headshot. Go to Simon. He's absolutely fantastic.
Passport photos. Will he do those?
I mean, I feel like the way the world's going, everyone probably will have a full headshot, won't they, on their passport soon? On your lanyard.
Lanyard.
Yeah, and we just got on, and we had such a good day when we were together, and he asked me, would I come to assist him on his photo shoot to do The Half. So you'll hear more about this in the interview, but what Simon does is he has a book called The Half, and the half an hour before the show, he will photograph actors and let you into their world through photos and through Simon's lens. And that's all I'll go into because Simon talks about that in the interview. But what I've done is I've been an assistant for him. One of the main things I'll do, for example, is light the photos. Now, I will put a disclaimer out there that I know nothing about lighting and I'm not taking credit for any of the lighting. Simon tells me exactly what to do and where to go. But at the end of the day, someone's got to hold that light.
Well, this is it. And that's a crucial job. That is a really crucial job. That's like saying, oh, I only drive the ambulance.
Well, I won't give too much credit. So I've held a light at a lot of places. I've been on tables, I've been on chairs, I've even stood in Bryan Cranston's shower at the National Theatre, lighting him in the bathroom. So I've been a lot of places with Simon's light.
Now there is a clanger. So tell us about some of the people that you've been there when he's photographed.
So I think the first one I did was maybe James Fox. We did Thoroughly Modern Millie's Own. So that was absolutely amazing for me because that's one of my favorite childhood films. Orlando Bloom, Michelle Dockery, Bryan Cranston, Rhys Ifans, Indira Varma. I mean, we've done productions as well. So we've worked a lot with Mark Rylance. Like Mark Rylance always uses Simon for his production shots. So we've done a couple of those. We did Julius Caesar at the Bridge Theatre and photographed Ben Whishaw. And I have to say, of all the dressing rooms I've ever been in, Ben Wishaw's dressing room was the best smelling dressing room. So we weren't allowed to talk to him because he was in the zone. That was fine. We were respecting him. But his dressing room has all of these reeds and aromatherapy oils. And it absolutely was just the most gorgeous space. And to be honest, when you were in that space, you didn't want to talk anyway. It was so relaxing. So I've just been very privileged to work with Simon and do a lot of different things with him. And
as an actor, though, do you think that would make me not want to go on?
I know, actually, yeah, you'd be so zen.
I just want to stay and be cozy in my dressing room.
No, he went on and he was fabulous, I have to say. It's been a really lovely relationship. And when we were doing the podcast, I knew we had to speak to Simon because Simon has been there, done that, knows everybody. And I think what Simon offers us that we've not had on the podcast yet is a different perspective into the performer's psyche, because we've had a lot of performers on, haven't we? And performers can talk really well about their own performance, but I wonder how many people have actually observed as many actors as Simon has, and not just actors, performers all around.
Well, I would guess at hardly anyone. He must be literally one of the only people.
And performers at the top of their game as well.
Oh yeah, totally. This is a difficult question without sort of going into every individual case. But would you say the people that you assisted Simon on when you were photographing them, did they live up to the expectation that you had of them going in? So were the big Hollywood stars very Hollywood starry? Were the sort of classically trained actors very disciplined? I know that's a very odd question to ask, but do you think that they were a sort of true representation of what your preconceptions were?
I think that is like a case by case, and I feel like you shouldn't snap and tell.
I think that needs to be Simon's new tagline.
Never snap and tell. Yeah.
New book. That's his new book. Never snap and tell.
Never snap and tell. And I have to say, I don't think I've actually really had a bad experience. So I'm not talking about anyone in particular. But actually, one of the most down-to-earth people was Orlando Bloom. But at the same time, one of the people that had the biggest Hollywood aura was Orlando Bloom. So he was kind of simultaneously both things at the same time.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to bring up a sore subject, but you missed out on Glenn Close, didn't you?
Oh, don't.
What was more important than that?
I wasn't in the country. So Simon asked me to go and photograph Glenn Close at the Coliseum. But of all things, it wasn't even just Glenn Close, it was Norma Desmond. And I think Norma Desmond is one of my favorite characters of all time. And to have seen her get into that process would have been, and I'm not just talking like, oh, I've liked this character. Like, this character has been like part of both of our psyches before we even knew each other, right? So since I was like 11 or something, and I was devastated. I don't actually know who went with Simon. If Simon's assistant is listening, name yourself. But what Simon did do, which was really nice, was for my 30th birthday, he gave me the big picture that he took, the big print of.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, he did.
Just to rub it in.
Just to rub it in that I wasn't there. Look what you could have had.
Look what you could have had. Well, I mean, I personally think that it would have been worth the plane fare for, but that's just me.
I know. I think I was teaching at the time and it was all very important.
I hope those students know what you gave up for them. And they better be grateful. Oh, how is this for weird? Right, talk about a sort of weird out-of-body experience. So in the interview, Simon mentions Eve Arnold, doesn't he? And we weren't familiar with Eve Arnold. We didn't know who she was. And I won't say it now. have a little listen and Simon will explain who Eve Arnold is. But I swear, yesterday, something possessed me. Something took hold of my body.
Oh, Michael, are you sure you should be revealing this on the podcast?
And I stood up involuntarily, went over to my bookshelf, and I just pulled out Joan Crawford's My Way of Life. That self-help book that Joan Crawford wrote in like the 70s, which is, you know, it's an absolute exercise in high campery. Some of the things that she's written. I don't know what made me do it. I truly do not know what made me stand up and pull the book out, but I did. And I opened the book and I opened it to the photo page, and the first photo, it said, photo credit Eve Arnold.
Well,
as though I was drawn to just seeing that name written down after we'd spoke about her.
And I think this is another great thing about the podcast, isn't it? Is that there's so much of this work that is in our everyday lives and we don't know to who we owe credit to. And that's why it's great to explore it so that we can all honor who needs honoring.
Right then, let's get into this interview. So we were very, very lucky enough to be invited to Simon's beautiful home. And I mean, we did this interview, didn't we, in Simon's living room. Now, let me tell you, Simon's living room was like an Aladdin's cave of magic as far as I'm concerned. It was wall-to-wall bookshelves with the most incredible books, photography books, and just books, books madness. It's carpet madness. Books and photos everywhere. It was like my heaven. It was the closest I've ever been to, you know, that scene in Beauty and the Beast where he gives her the library.
Yeah,
he takes her into the library and opens all the curtains. Well, that, I watch that now and I think I know how she felt because I was in Simon Annand's living room.
What I think that living room was, if the ghost of Christmas future came to you and held your hand and took you into your future, that is basically where we were. Like Simon's presence is your future. Like your living room is like wanting to be that living room so bad, and it's not far off. I'll tell the listeners, Mike's living room is well on the way to being a Simon Annand's Aladdin's Cave, but it isn't quite there yet, and one day it will be.
But we went and had a lovely meal, didn't we?
Yes, we did, with Simon's wonderful partner, and we had a gorgeous meal and a glass of wine, and we just had such a gorgeous evening. And I think a lot of the time when we record these podcasts, we always have a good time. I don't think we've ever had a bad time.
No, never.
What would we say instead of we never snap and tell?
Oh. Well, I was going to say we never chat and tell, but we absolutely do. That is the complete antithesis of what we do. We completely just tell every detail of what happened.
But sometimes then when we listen to the podcast back, we're like, that still sounds great, but it isn't how it felt to us as an experience. Whereas I think this podcast, and maybe it's because we were already close to Simon when we started, this podcast, the feelings that you get when you listen to it are exactly how the evening was. And we would love for you to now sit down and press play and feel like you were in that Aladdin's cave yourself.
So let's get him on. Without further ado, here is our interview with Simon Annand.
Whoa. Hello.
Hello, Simon. So we are here in Simon's living room, and Mike is already decided he's never leaving.
I'm probably not going to speak very much because there's just so much. I'm like a magpie. Like, there's just so much catching my attention that it kind of escapes me that we're doing an interview.
Yeah, we don't want...
Well, that's a good thing.
If you've got books in front of you with titles like Elizabeth Taylor, Grace Kelly, Sophia Loren, like, you can't expect me to concentrate.
You're the perfect guest for the room.
He did it for you.
He did it for me.
So, why we want to speak to you today, Simon, besides you being a very dear friend of mine, we know that you...
I feel I've been summoned to the headmaster's office.
Simon just pulled a face to suggest...
The frown on Simon's face suggests that he's not a dear friend.
He's not a dear friend.
No, you are definitely a dear friend.
But we know that you probably, I am going to say, have been in more dressing rooms than anybody else in the country.
In the world.
In the world.
I would think so,
Except for Eve Arnold.
Why?
Eve Arnold, you know Eve Arnold?
No.
Eve Arnold was Marilyn Monroe's favourite photographer.
Oh,
and she went into a number of dressing rooms, like Joan Crawford and Marlene Dietrich, and I mean in the really golden 50s and so on. And when I showed my first book to her in 2008, she looked at it, and she was at 99 at the time, 98 I think. She looked at it and said, she talked like this, you know. I wish I'd thought of this, you know. Because she's went to a lot of dressing rooms, took pictures. I don't think there's anybody else who's thought of making a body of work.
Oh, so she never documented them, or
not as a
book,
a separate sort of project.
Wow.
I don't think.
So what inspired you to start doing it in the first place?
Well, there's a story, Maria. Don't you know it already?
I know the story already, but our listeners might not want to know.
You give me a Chinese Whispers version of it, and I'll see if it...
I know you started at the Gate, did you?
No.
Notting Hill?
First mistake. First, no.
Was it not?
No. It was the Lyric Theatre Hammersmith. I was on the bar at the Lyric Theatre Hammersmith in 1982, roughly, for a couple of years, very, very badly, because I don't make a good barman, getting bored out of my mind. And there was a production on at the theatre called Charlie's Aunt, with Griff Rhys-Jones, which is very successful. And I was very impressed by how they did it. So they had, the old cliche of that a farce needs to be like a continuous breaking of a wave onto the shore. One after the other, you make the laughs roll in. And Griff was achieving this without any doubt at all. So I wanted to witness a bit of it, because I was down on the bar, and I bought a camera, pretended I was a photographer, and made it up as I went along. And the first shot I ever did of a production in the theatre was crawling illegally up the lighting gantry to get the best gag in the show, which was him pouring the milk into the top hat of the father of the woman he wanted to marry. And that was my first ever shot, and I thought, well, I'm pleased with myself. And then the second best laugh in the show was when he popped his head through the flat, which was a flat on one side and a window on the stage, and he got, the timing was immaculate, and he got this wave of laughter crashing down onto them. So I said, well, Griff, do you mind, could you let me photograph you just before you pop your head through the flat? And he'd let me do that. And he was gearing himself up to be ebullient, which is what the character demanded. And something clicked in my brain, and I thought, well, let's go one step further back into the dressing room to see what it might be like there. And he allowed me to do that in another cliche, but it was quite melancholic in the room. Griff wasn't being ebullient and funny and laughing all the time. He was just preparing himself. So I took a picture of that, and I really did think at that moment there might be a body of work to be made here, even though I wasn't really a photographer at all and hadn't done anything for money or anything. And then 25 years later it came out as a book, having dared myself to ask people like Anthony Hopkins and Maggie Smith and all sorts of people whether they would be interested to promote theatre as live performance through a series of dressing room photographs. And they were delighted to do it because they'd thought of it themselves and wondered why somebody hadn't done it. And that was in 2009, and then I've had a series of exhibitions around the world, in New York and London and Paris and Moscow and Berlin and so on, and Beijing. And I brought out the second book of this work. It's a couple of years ago now.
During the pandemic?
During the pandemic, yeah.
Mm-hmm. You had a series of virtual showings, didn't you, for that? How was that for you?
Well, they set up a virtual, very clever virtual gallery which you could enter to promote the book, really, which is still live.
And it's fabulous.
Thank you.
It really, really is.
Very
because it's very different, because the half is all black and white, but this is all colour. What was the decision behind the difference of that?
Partly because in the first 25 years I couldn't really afford. I mean, colour is a different technical process, and I could only afford to do this project if I developed the black and white myself in the bathroom or in a cupboard or in the loft or something. With colour you had to take it to the lab and they'd charge you a lot of money. Mm-hmm. But digital came along, and I made the leap in 2003 to go digital, which shoots in colour by definition. So you get colour pictures. But once you go into colour, you're photographing things in a different way, because the colour backstage is not particularly attractive. I mean, it's quite grim and flat and tungsten light, fluorescent light. So you either go for the muted palette. If you're shooting something like Chekhov, it's muted. If you're shooting Panto, you go for the really contrasty, loud colours as much as possible. And it's fabulous. I love it. But that almost has to be a reason to shoot in colour as opposed to a reason to shoot in black and white. Even though we see in colour. You know, I was familiar with seeing the world through black and white. And I think the generation these days, do they still like black and white?
I think so.
We love black and white. I think black and white's more to create a mood, isn't it? Or a special look. But I think definitely colour is used more often. But there's so many filters these days. Yes. It's a completely different...
It is.
You can do so much, can't you, just on your phone that, like, even 5 years ago you wouldn't have been able to do.
Yeah.
So what we're interested in, because we love variety and we've been speaking to so many different people of different genres of variety theatre, and you've been in the dressing rooms of so many different styles of performances, like you just said, Panto and Chekhov, and some of the people that you've been in the room with, you know, comedians. Is there a difference for those people getting ready, or are the similarities that run through?
So, for example, if you were going to go into the dressing room of, say, Spike Milligan, would that be different?
I was hoping. I thought if he picks up on Spike, I know he's read the list of people I've seen.
We have.
That was going to be my test.
So, for example, Spike Milligan as opposed to, say, Vanessa Redgrave. You know, is there a real marginal difference in just the ambience of the dressing room or the ambience of the performer?
Yeah, it's not what you might think. Spike, bless him, Gordon Bennett. You know, in those days, it must have been 1986 or something like that, when I really didn't have any spare money, and I splashed out on a train ticket, day return, to go and see him in Chichester, where he was doing a Christmas show, dressed with a kind of Hitler moustache, for the kids. and I knew, I'd read somewhere that he considered to be photographed was taking a part of his soul away every time someone took a picture of him. So I didn't want to, you know, I wanted to make him feel comfortable. So I put on my most colourful shirt and I went down there. And I managed to take 7 pictures on an old-fashioned camera with a film in it before he found an excuse to flee the room.
Wow.
To actually just leave. And it was about 6 or 7 minutes.
That's all you had to work with?
Yeah. There are a couple of pictures there which have resonance, and one in particular which is in the first book, where he really is there in front of his old-fashioned makeup box, dressed a bit, his costume is a bit like a clown. He's got this kind of semi-Hitler moustache, looking very melancholic, you know, and that is worth something. It's quite a rare picture.
Well, that's a terrible thing, Simon, that you took 7 parts of his soul. Poor Spike Milligan, like Voldemort.
No, but it's a bit ironic. I mean, for goodness sake, he's been photographed thousands of times in different contexts. But there is something maybe one-to-one where it feels a bit more like that your soul has been taken. You know.
And did he communicate that to you before you went, or you could just feel when you were there?
I knew it. That's the one thing I didn't. I knew more about that than I did about his work. Actually, it's only after that session that I really understood the goons. Because to me, the goons didn't make any sense, which of course is the point.
Yes, yeah.
He's trying to be logically illogical, which is why it's funny. And I love his work now, you know, because it makes me feel at home. You know, it makes me feel sane when your mind is going mad.
It's funny that you mentioned Charlie's Aunt, because I know someone that did make their West End debut in Charlie's Aunt very early in their career was John Gielgud, who you also photographed. How is it for you as a photographer? You're standing outside the door and you're about to go in the space of somebody like John Gielgud, or like you say, Anthony Hopkins, or Maggie Smith, or Judi Dench, the real giants, the real greats. Is it an intimidating thing to go in, or actually have you become almost immune to it? Is it just they're just another performer?
Neither of them.
Okay.
It's certainly not intimidating, and depending on who I've got as my assistant.
Is that a mean look at me? I think I keep you very calm.
No, Maria, you're a very good assistant.
Thank you.
You're just the right size.
I'm small enough to stand on a chair in the corner with
And
the
not be
light
noticed,
and not be
yeah.
in the way.
As long as you don't chat too much.
I have been told off for that.
But no, you're almost perfect.
Thank you.
But it's all been prearranged, you know. And if they consent to do it, I'm feeling very secure about it.
Right.
But the key thing for me is not to go into their room as though it's my studio. It's their space, and my job is to be open to the rhythm of their mood that I find when I enter.
And the intention, isn't it, is to capture the mood, or it's to get a sense of how they are before a show or before a performance. But how much of that do you think... Do you notice that some performers are very aware of you and almost put on the act for you? Or do you find that more of them are just very candid and are just allowing you to be in their space?
I mean, actors are as different as anybody else is. You know, you've got different... There's always a spectrum, and at one end of the spectrum you've got the method actors. For example, Daniel Day-Lewis is famous for that, and Michael Sheen. When I took pictures of Michael's Hamlet as the production photographer, so he knew me, but for him to consent to pictures in the dressing room, he said, well, okay, but you mustn't say a word, you know, to allow him to do what he needs to do. Fine, you know, of course I'm going to agree to that. The other end of the spectrum is maybe someone like Daniel Radcliffe, who agreed to be seen for the first time, apparently. I approached his father, Alan Radcliffe, and I said to him, well, I'm doing this book, and Daniel would be the youngest person in the book, which would be great, and the oldest person is 92, Robert Edison. And they liked the idea, so they gave me the opportunity to see Daniel Radcliffe. And I was in there, just him and me, you know. There was no film crew around, and even though he'd had 4 or 5 films in the bank, you know, and he was just about to turn 18.
Was this Equus?
It was Equus, yeah. And he didn't quite... He sort of didn't freeze up, but he didn't quite, you know... I thought, oh, all right, I better step in here.
Yeah.
And lead it, which is the opposite of being open to what they're doing. So we talked about cricket and everything, which I knew he enjoyed. And I sort of guided him through it. He's allowed me to do it again a couple of times. And on the third occasion, he said very interestingly that he didn't like looking at the camera. He preferred his off-camera look.
Right.
Which is fine, you know, by me, staring into the distance. So, and there's everything in between. So that's part of why the story keeps on giving, because I don't try and control the subject. It would be a waste of time. You know, I've chosen to spend my time and trying to meet up with somebody because I like them, either as a person, a man or a woman, or as their work as an actor. It doesn't always coincide. but I'm, you know, I know that they're going to be photogenic. Yeah. Because of the nature of their work, and they are trusting me because they want their work, their preparation to be seen through my eyes, so that they trust me. But when you're taking a picture, it's an interesting thing to do, and if you're a photographer, you have to have a body of work, you know, that you're deepening all the time. And all it does is tell the viewer of the photograph what you thought was interesting about the subject you're photographing. So you're just marking something. There's an objectivity, but there's also a subjectivity. You're putting into the picture the moment when you click the shutter is when your head and your heart are connected to what you find interesting about that person. But what makes somebody photogenic, in my opinion, is the relationship that person has with themselves in their own head. Everybody is going through that, whether you're a beggar or you're a monarch. You know, you've got to deal with yourself from when you wake up in the morning and when you go to bed at night. And that's one of the reasons I love Samuel Beckett's work so much, is because I think he understood the problem. When you wake up in the morning, you've got to start again, and the way that you actually open your eyes, you get out of the bed, you walk towards the bathroom, the way you brush your teeth, you start to tell yourself who you are. Mm-hmm. You give yourself an identity, and if you can't do that, you're in crisis, which is a sort of waiting for Godot. It's a big problem. And it's funny, it's a funny situation, really. And you do it day after day after day. And you have a version of yourself that you construct in front of the mirror, whether you're doing it consciously or unconsciously. And everybody's going through that. So an actor performs at night, they maybe go out to a restaurant or something, then they go to bed, they wake up as themselves, and they have to live that day. And whatever happens to them during the day, they bring in with them into the building when they start to be somebody else. And I've chosen the moment when those two parts of them, their interest in the fictional character and the way that they're dealing with themselves according to how they feel that day, comes into contact. So they negotiate those two sides of themselves. And that is doubly photogenic, because you've got two things going on. And you don't have to say very much. The session I did with Daniel Craig in 1999 before Bond, he I don't think it's too personal to say, but he was filming the story about Sylvia Plath. It was called Sylvia. He was playing Ted Hughes.
Ted Hughes, yeah.
He was kind of falling out of love with his partner in Berlin, and maybe falling in love with his co-star in the film, and he had to go on and do a theatre two-hander with Michael Gambon in the evening after filming during the day. So he had a lot going on in his head, and we hardly said a word.
Yeah,
and you don't really need to.
Amazing shots.
Yeah, it's hopefully the shots are strong because of what's going on in the person's head, but they remain open, so that the person looking at the picture the viewer can hang their picture, their story onto the image, rather than the image screaming, I am about this, or this is what Daniel Craig's about. I don't know Daniel Craig at all in that sense. But the way he responded to the camera and who was holding the camera, they have some poignance, I think, given what was going on in his head at the time, at that time in his life.
So talking about time passing, how is it when you photograph someone and then you maybe see them again a few years later, or many years later in some cases?
No, it's interesting. I'm going to, as you may know, do a book on that very subject. So because I've been doing it for 40 years, I can show examples of the same actor 10, 20, 30 or 40 years apart. Some people go on more of a journey than others, as is always the case. I've just been photographing Jerusalem again, the 2022 version, and I also did the 2009 version. And it's interesting to see Mark Rylance and how he's playing it now, that he's probably quite well off, and he's very, very famous. He's a superstar. Whereas before he was just a highly regarded theatre actor. He's now world famous. It'd be interesting to get the observations of someone other than myself who had witnessed both of those and see what they thought the changes were. I'm always going to give the benefit of the doubt to anybody I photograph. I always think that the development is a strong one and it's a good one.
If time travel was a thing, Simon, you could travel back and you could photograph any performer from history, who would you like to photograph? Who would you like to see
at the other end
of your lens?
Well, yeah. Cool. I did actually see Jimi Hendrix when I was 15.
Wow.
At the Isle of Wight. But I wasn't a photographer then, so I wish I'd had a camera. But musicians on stage are really quite difficult to... I love music, but they're very difficult to photograph beyond the cliche or the familiar of, for example, saxophonists. How do you photograph a saxophonist other than they're holding their horn? But there are lots of things going on in their brains, I did photograph Miles Davis twice in the 1980s, which was a big thrill. and he hated photographers. And I remember going in 1985, when I was barely 2 or 3 years into it, going along to the Apollo Theatre in Hammersmith, where he was on. And in those days, you could just, if you just get up out of your seat, go to the stage, and I rested my camera on stage, and he famously played at the back of the stage with his back to the audience. As you can imagine, he was into his music. And then I had my long lens on, and I was looking at him, and he turned round, and I thought, oh, thank God, goodness, I can see him now. But he started walking towards the front of the stage, and he was walking right directly up to me, and I didn't have the balls or whatever it was to change the lens, because it needed to be a wide angle lens, because he came right up to me, blew his trumpet right up my camera, and I can just see the shot that I could have taken, if I changed the lens. And then I saw him, photograph him again the next day in a different context, when he came with his wife Cicely Tyson to the Lyric Hammersmith, where I was working, to see Ben Kingsley playing Edmund Kean just after Kingsley got the Oscar for Gandhi.
Was that just a coincidence that he turned up?
It was a coincidence. Well, because he was in Hammersmith for his music. His wife had said, let's go and see Ben Kingsley. And I remember the bar manager, who was a Turkish man, whose hero, one of his heroes was Miles Davis. He said, you've got to take a picture of us, And I did, and it was my first front cover for the Stage magazine. Just snapping, really, of Ben Kingsley and Miles Davis.
Fantastic.
But I didn't really answer your question.
Well, you did. I mean, Jimi Hendrix was a great
someone like Greta Garbo. I don't know.
Yes.
Someone like that. There's so many, aren't there?
Because it's a different
Richard Burton, Paul Scofield.
It's a different photography, isn't it? I think those shots that we see of all those sort of really glamorous Hollywood stars, they're so contrived, aren't they? Those images that we have of them, and what you have, as you said, is that moment between, like, even Marilyn Monroe, the images we see, they're very produced. I would love to see your Marilyn before she became Marilyn,
Yeah, I mean, I think Eve Arnold did a pretty good job, and that was a woman-to-woman relationship, which may have been in... But, yeah, Marilyn Monroe, God. Imagine.
I know.
But that's one of the things, we're talking about that golden period, Rory Bremner, who is a very good impressionist, and he said he could do Cary Grant, he can do James Stewart, he can do Humphrey Bogart, but he can't do Johnny Depp and Brad Pitt, because there's nothing he can get his hands on, which opens up that whole area of how personality may have shrunk a little bit. This is not because I've never met Brad Pitt or Johnny Depp, but in general over society, personality has diminished in politics, for example. If you just 45, 50 years ago, you look at the weight that these men and women had as politicians, it's been reduced, I think.
Well, this is something that comes up time and time again when we're talking about variety theatre and what made some acts sort of stay in public opinion and how did they get to the top, and it's always personality and warmth again and again, that everybody tells us that's how they made it, that you had to have a brand, you had to have something that the audience could that was yours, that the audience could connect with. And I think that's a similar thing with those people you're talking about.
I mean, personality in the old-fashioned sense was developed through struggle and being tested. And if you can develop your own personality aligned with the number of skills that you take on board, it becomes a proper unit, if you know what I mean. As opposed, I mean, in the 1960s it was a great opportunity when all these courses were invented for, architects or painters or sculptors or actors. It was great that everyone had access to it, but the problem is that it doesn't make you an artist. You get given a syllabus of 3 or 4 years or something, and you have to do everything. You accumulate all these skills according to the syllabus, and they may be out of sync with what's actually happening to you. So in the old days, you were probably in your 40s before you really had anything much to say, which you filtered through your skills. But now the pressure is on people much younger to do that. and for me, it's the difference between direct and indirect experience. So it's a bit of a cliche, but if you go up to the Hebrides and you go at 6 o'clock in the evening into the pub and you're with the fishermen there, they'll probably be talking about what they did that day, in the catch and the fish they caught and everything, over their whiskey. If you're at 6 o'clock on the tube in London, you're probably, either, if you're lucky, people are talking to each other, and they might be saying, "Did you hear this? Did you see that? Did you read this?" It's indirect experience. So everyone's life is mediated through the media, and you're told, or you seek out other people's opinion about something, as opposed to directly experiencing it yourself, owning it and shaping it, and it comes out in your act. Whether you're a conjurer in the Variety or you're an actor in Shakespeare or whatever. The great actors in the 1960s, they did get drunk a bit too much, but when you saw them on stage, they burned it up. You couldn't take your eyes off them, and that was their own personality emanating through the text. As well.
I remember you told me once that you wanted
I've said it all before.
Bob Dylan. You told me
Bob
Dylan.
Bob Dylan. It would be the dream job, I think. And he is. I've probably said before, but he's the only person on the planet. For me, if he came into the room, my legs would go a bit. He's just the real deal.
Yeah.
I think he's been very courageous. He risked his reputation. He didn't give a hoot, about it. Over the years, he hasn't always been as, he's had certain periods where he's been more golden than others, but
that's an artist, isn't it? Like you're saying, that's someone that
he really lets it go through him, and he'll talk about what it's. He's written so many love songs. As a 75-year-old, he'll write how it is to be in love or to be rejected or something, as opposed to someone like Mick Jagger, who is he's achieved so much, but he still thinks he's 25, and he doesn't write poignantly, or Leonard Cohen does write poignantly about how it is to age and change, and Bob Dylan just, I don't know, it'd be a real test of what I believe in, which is to be with someone like that and not be overawed by him, but try and come out with some images which had resonance according to how he felt that day.
That's what I'm trying to do now with you.
You haven't got anywhere close. You don't know how I feel today.
Well, we've talked a lot about a lot of different people you'd like to photograph, but in terms of performers, and if you think about maybe variety performers, who are some of your heroes that you've seen? Well,
it's more panto to me, but I did look that up today a little bit, trying to be clever, and I noticed that, I'm sure you know, panto is much older than variety, and it goes right back to the Roman times when pantomimus was something that existed. And I was just quite astonished by that, actually. The form has been developed over such a long period of time.
What is it about panto that you love?
Well, thank you for the prompt there. But panto appears to be on one end of a spectrum, whereas you've got Shakespeare on the other end of the spectrum. And I think it's a load of cobblers, that Hugh Grant doesn't do panto, but if you take Hugh Grant as someone who is the best in the world at playing an awkward Englishman in love, nobody can do it better than him, but he knows he doesn't want to do Hamlet, and the person who can do Hamlet can't do what Hugh does. So in pantomime, I remember Roger Lloyd Pack, who's a brilliant TV comedy royalty in many ways. When he tried to do, bless him, Panto at the Barbican with the Mark Ravenhill script, he was struggling. He was finding it quite difficult to achieve it. So that whole discipline of handling an audience and making them go where you want them to go of a pantomime is as difficult to me as saying a soliloquy in Shakespeare. I would have thought, even though I'm not an actor. But I respect them equally.
Yeah.
And there's everything else in between.
Well, that's what we like to hear.
It is. And we've just been looking at photos from Ken Dodd's birthday that you took. Obviously a very, very prolific variety performer. How was that? How was that experience of going and taking photos, not of him in his stage persona, but in his personal celebration? How different was that for you?
It was interesting, yeah. So that started when I was taking pictures of Stephanie Cole, who was a good friend of Ken Dodd's, and she came for her headshots with me, and she mentioned that it was Ken Dodd's birthday in about 3 weeks' time. And I perked up because I thought, wow, there is one of the real legends. And she said, oh, would you like to be in touch with Ken Dodd? And I said, yes, please, And so she told Ken and Anne about me, and I was doing another headshot about a few days later of somebody else. And the phone went, and on the other end of the line was, I can't do his accent, I'm sorry, but he was Ken Dodd, And he was saying, I've heard about you, son, do you want to come and do the photographs of my 90th birthday? And I sort of dropped everything and said, yes, please. I said, well, what are the logistics of the situation? And he said, oh, now you're using fancy words. He said, I thought, this is my man. I thought he would be someone really great to take pictures for. And when I got up there to the famous hotel, which you will know the name of.
The Devonshire.
The Devonshire, yeah.
Hotel, yeah.
And we were all waiting for him to arrive. And he came in, and I was probably about the fourth or the fifth person he came up to, because he'd never met me before. We'd never met, and he said to me, hello, son, I know that you're Simon, And I said, well, what would you like me to take pictures of? And he said, oh, you just do what you want, And I thought, done. That's what I want to hear, and I'll work my backside off for you tonight. And I wasn't expecting any money, anything like that. Just the privilege of being there, and it was a fantastic experience. It really was. The great and the good had turned out for him, and they knew that he would pay for the food, but he wouldn't pay for the drink.
Sounds familiar.
It really does.
Yeah. So you, as we've said, have been all over. What I love about your work is that you don't just stick to the West End. You travel and you go all over the country, and you will take pictures of shows of any sort of size, budget, cast, all of that. You've been over to Broadway. Where are some of your favourite theatres?
The number one for me is the Old Vic Theatre in London, but it's partly connected to my personal association with it. So it was the first time that I was given money to take photographs. In 1987 I became their resident photographer. At the time I was working as a gardener, and I had the balls then to write to Jonathan Miller and say, who was taking over to rescue this famous building after a period of doldrums, would he consider seeing me to be a resident photographer? And he liked the left-hand side of his brain, which was quite enormous, liked the idea of a gardener coming to do this. So I started there and had 2.5 years of sheer heaven, because I love theatre as much as photography, and I was there, and so I have a physical, emotional connection to the space. But the actual auditorium is so elegant. It's one of those. It's a bit like the opera house. You stand on the stage, and it feels like a warm embrace around the performer. And then if you're in the auditorium looking at the stage, it looks much bigger. So it's really clever illusion.
I'm wondering, what gave you the balls to write to these people? How did you get so confident?
I believed in my motives. In other words, I'm doing it for the love of. And my dad was a teacher, and he saw himself as a gentleman and a scholar. He was definitely a scholar. He was a double first at Cambridge. But his definition of gentleman was to do something for the love of it without considering how much you get paid for it, which is a very sort of old-fashioned thing. And that's what I took on board. And because I wasn't being predatory, I wasn't trying to catch somebody out or find a scoop or something. I really had a love for the theatre. I think that probably comes through. And, it's about trust. and I'm always on the side of the actor. I think the actor is on the front line of a production. You know, once the opening night's over and the director's gone on to something else, and the actor has to stay with what they've created in the rehearsal room, and that's quite impressive, I think. And it's handmade work. You know, it's continuous. It's recreated every day, the value of which is increasing.
Have you seen many shows that you've taken production photos of, such as Warhorse or something, and then gone back months and months later and it's felt different to you?
Yeah, inevitably the actors can lose discipline, and it must be quite difficult to maintain everything that you've been set in motion in rehearsals. I mean, sometimes it improves. You know, it gets better with the playing of it, quite often actually. And the actors start directing themselves. It's always different, you know, there's no sort of generalisation.
So, Simon, if you could be a performer yourself, if we were going to rewrite history here and you're not going to take any photographs anymore, you're going to be a performer, you can do anything on stage. What God-given talent?
Music. It'll be music.
It's music.
Guitar and piano.
Fabulous.
What genre? What would you like to play?
Well, originally when I was younger, I am a failed musician, blues music. And why would I, as a white middle class Englishman, be interested in blues? But I was. I grew up with the blues, not through struggle, but through the sound of it. And I don't know if you know someone called Son House. Do you know Son House?
Oh, it's
Son House.
I've heard of it.
Have you heard of Robert Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, Son House taught Robert Johnson how to play the guitar. Right. Which is like Robert Johnson created 36 or something songs which are all classics.
Yeah.
He's the Mozart of the blues, and he died in 1936, I think. And my brother met Son House in 1972, just before he died, when he was on those packages of old blues performers coming out to the UK, which is an incredible thing to have done. And he asked Son House at the time who he thought was the best white blues singer around, and he said Tom Jones, interestingly enough, rather than Mick Jagger or something. But I would probably want to go on into jazz, but
that's great.
But I don't think guitar and piano piano is very good on jazz, but I don't think guitar is the best instrument for jazz. Probably want to take up a horn of some kind.
And would you have performed for the audience or had your back to them like Miles Davis?
I would have performed right up into the audience.
But I love that you're telling us that, as I can see a big poster of Nina Simone in the background as well. That was quite fitting.
I photographed her. No, I did photograph her.
You didn't?
At Ronnie Scott's, yeah.
How was she? Because, she was notoriously quite difficult.
She nearly had me thrown out.
I can imagine. Yeah. I'm surprised she didn't...
Well, Ronnie Scott's,
Yeah.
I got into the front row, and it was very early on, so I wasn't experienced, and I knew that she had this thing about, she could be quite difficult. Yeah. But I'd taken about 4 shots, But I must have taken them at the wrong, off the beat or something. And she noticed it, and I got that feeling that if I didn't stop, I'd be thrown out. But
what a temperament! But she was fantastic. I love Nina Simone. Absolutely love her.
Why do you love her?
Personality again.
Yeah,
I think it comes back.
Uncompromising.
Totally uncompromising. I saw a great interview with her once. The interviewer says, "Well, there's this terrible rumor going around, Nina, that you threatened a music executive with a knife," and she goes, "It was a gun."
Perfect.
Yeah, and that was totally her. Totally unabashed, totally unapologetic. She was great. And really quite, she really didn't care too much about the audience. She was on stage for herself. I've heard the story where the audience were booing her and terribly because she did like a half an hour version of When the Saints Go Marching In, and she just wouldn't stop because she wanted to. Yeah.
Should we do our quick fire round?
Let's do it.
Bette Davis or Miles Davis?
Miles Davis.
Film or digital?
Film.
Joan Plowright or Vivien Leigh?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Vivien Leigh, I think. Sorry, Joan, but Vivien.
How was photographing Joan?
She's amazing. Goodness me. She's my first meeting with her was a production of House of Bernarda Alba by Lorca at 1985 at the Lyric Hammersmith, and I did an exhibition around that, and Glenda Jackson was playing the mother, and Joan Plowright was playing the maid, and they had different views on life. Glenda Jackson would be in her dressing gown with bare feet, smoking a cigarette around the rehearsal room, and Joan Plowright would be turn up in a white Mercedes with a driver and a fur coat. Why? I mean, I'm not judging either of them, but they clashed.
I think she enjoyed being Lady Olivier.
Oh yes, yes. And so when I photographed her in her dressing room at the Haymarket, there was a large colour photograph of Lord Olivier in a golden frame on the mantelpiece, just in case anybody didn't know who she was. And she gave me 2 minutes, which is the shortest time I've ever been given. And what clicked into gear was there's a photographer called Bill Brandt. He's a famous German portrait photographer in black and white mostly, and he photographed lots of well-known people in the 30s, 40s and 50s. And I went along to an exhibition of his at the National Portrait Gallery, which I thought was interesting. And one of the things I picked up on was if he didn't particularly like the person he was photographing, how did he handle it? And he would retain some of his own feelings in the composition or whatever, but he would never make the person look bad. So there's a sort of compromise. And this was what kicked in at this moment, because Joan gave me 2 minutes firstly, which is quite short, and she was sitting at her desk. She extended her hand to be sort of kissed, and I thought, okay, well, I'm pretty young and inexperienced here, but I'll do my best. And I saw this massive hand mirror on a golden plinth in front of her, so I asked her to look at herself, and then took a picture of it. So it was a reflection of her regarding herself, and that went into the book. It had an honesty to it.
Yeah.
So Vivian Leigh.
Vivian Leigh. But then, bless. I mean, you have to complete that story, because she did ask me round, for tea after that to their house. And
well, there you go.
In Chelsea, and we had dainties and
just
Earl
the two
Grey.
of you.
Yeah, he was in the back. I wanted to meet him a bit as well. But
and he didn't come out?
He didn't come out, no. He wasn't very well at the time. But I mean, I would always have time for, goodness me. Lucky me to have... I mean, she's been there, done it,
So we've even had 2 minutes.
Yeah, well, I had more minutes later, but Vivian Leigh.
Okay, stage door sneak out or press night party. I've ended up many parties with you after
I'd go to the
session,
party.
so
Why would I not go to the party?
Well, some people say sneak.
I'd do a stage door sneak out, absolutely.
Stage sneak out? That sounds very judgmental.
Well, that's what you like to do, isn't
It is.
Sneak out? You don't want to be seen. Well,
I'd be sneaking out, Simon, to avoid the photographers. And then I'd look up and see that you actually weren't taking pictures of me, and then I'd be really annoyed. I'd be like, why aren't you taking pictures of me sneaking out?
I've been to many a party with you.
Have you? Oh, good.
Definitely a party, a press night party.
Good, yeah. I'm going to one next week.
Oh, well, I look forward to my invite.
Well.
Terry O'Neill or Cecil Beaton?
Cecil Beaton, yeah.
Excellent. Who would you rather photograph? The next big thing or yesterday's news?
Next big thing. I mean, I like people who've achieved something.
Yeah.
I really do. I like old people in general. My dad was 40 when I was born, so I've always liked that. I really enjoy spending time with people who've done it. But it's very thrilling to take pictures of people. Colin Firth when he was, whatever, or Benedict Cumberbatch, or Kenneth Branagh, or Lily James, or that sort of thing.
I remember we took Sheila Ateem's photo, and then I think she won the Olivier the next day.
Really?
Yeah.
For what? For the
for the girl from the North Country. And it was the next day she won it, and we taken it in, and she just became a household name then.
I remember photographing her before she was Sheila Ateem, and she was just doing chorus at the Globe. She was one of 3 people in the chorus there, And I hadn't a clue, you know, she was... But I thought, my God, I had noticed her. I thought, who on earth is that, you know?
Yeah.
She looks like she's come out of somewhere very extraordinary.
I loved the one of Frances de la Tour. That really struck me. That
First
seemed
book.
very striking. I think it was the first book, yeah. But she's in character. She's got a cigarette and her hair's up, and she's looking very... That just really struck me because, I don't know, it seemed very true to her, what we see of her personality on stage and on screen, but it also seemed very real as well.
Well, she's playing Edith Sitwell, and you could imagine that the two women are quite... I mean, I can imagine why Frances was interested in playing Edith Sitwell. So it was a good, you know, connection there. As far as I know, Frankie's quite... She's very Labour politically, and Edith Sitwell would have been the opposite of that.
Yeah.
So maybe it gives her permission. You know, that's why I like actors.
Yeah.
That they get the opportunity to play away from themselves.
They get to break their own rules, almost.
Well, yeah. I mean, I like it when people take the mickey out of me. It doesn't happen very often, though.
Well, this is why Maria always tends to get cast as such dignified and refined ladies.
Oh, thank you. I'm sat here with my legs wide open with my glass of wine.
Yes. No, quite. We are looking forward to Maria's Cleopatra.
Put
that in.
That can be in your next book. Have you taken many pictures of double acts?
Haven't done it a lot.
You haven't done it a lot.
No. But I mean,
the next time Twice Nightly's on.
I know, we need to get you down to see it.
We need to get you down.
I would love you to see it.
yeah.
Our show. I
I
would
was
love for
mortified
you
you
to see it.
didn't give me an invite to the
Well,
opening
it was
night
in
party.
Liverpool. It was too.
So
too
I'd come up to Liverpool. I'd go up to Liverpool for Ken Dodd. I'd come up to Liverpool for you. Do you think? Let me ask you a question. Do you think Variety has a lot of irony in it?
Oh.
Yeah.
How?
I've never thought about that, actually.
Because it seems to be such a concise way of getting straight to the point, which is very useful, you know.
I think as time has gone on, I think through the ages it probably became more ironic. I think probably not so much in its rawer forms.
There's just so many different acts, isn't there? And that's what we're discovering the more we do it. Is just.
But does the performer assume that the audience know the joke before they do it? You know, so it's recognition of something about life that everyone.
Again, I think
it's different on the performer. I think that's what's so. Everyone's so different, and I mean, because you have some people who are playing stock characters, and they will play up to the character that they're known for, that they're famous for, and then you get other people that come out and genuinely are pretending to be something else or pretending to be themselves, and I don't know, they have to work different.
It's funny that you mentioned Roger Lloyd Pack, actually, because that is one of the photos that to me stood out from your book. I think it was in the second. Oh, I'm not sure actually now.
He's in both, yeah.
Yeah, but it was the one where he's dressed as the Dame, sort of in his padding, you know, just ready to go on. There's a section of
First one, yeah.
of backstage panto people, and he was one of them, and that really stood out to me. The Roger Lloyd Pack one, because I thought he looked. It's because it's strange that you said that he struggled with it, because in that photo he looked completely at home, and I thought, I bet you he was fantastic as a Dame. So to hear that he struggled with it is really interesting, because your photo gave off a completely different vibe, I guess.
Yeah.
But I suppose, you know, for me to know that, probably I would have had to have seen the show as well.
I mean, I didn't see his performance. He just said it.
But the photo's fantastic. It's stunning.
Yeah, he looks like he's enjoying himself.
He really does. No, he really, really does. That's why it was a surprise.
Big tits.
Yeah, and the big bum. He's got he's out both ends, and it was a great photo.
And then there was a knock on the door, and it was Martin Freeman. Before he was Martin Freeman. I've got a picture of them talking to each other.
Have you? He's huge now, isn't he, Martin?
Yeah,
Freeman?
it's amazing.
Quite ironic for a hobbit. And it's worth mentioning as well that Simon is currently working on a further 3 books to add to his catalogue. How exciting is that? Can't wait to see those.
Do you reckon one's about me, one's about you, and one's about all those other Hollywood
Clangers.
Well, there you go. We hope you enjoyed that and all those whoop, woo.
And we really, I know we've said it a lot, but I'm just going to say it one more time. We cannot recommend Simon's books highly enough. Go and seek them out. You are in for an absolute treat. If you're a fan of theatre, if you're a fan of film, if you're a fan of music, if you're a fan of photography, there is something for everyone. They are one of a kind.
Before we finish, I'd just like to say a really special thank you to Gareth Joyner, who was our guest last week for a wonderful show down at the Soho Theatre, the Frank Lavender Show. I went, it was brilliant, had such a good time. And if you want to hear more about that, go back to last week and hear all about Frank Lavender and Myra Dubois.
Don't forget to give us a follow on all of our social media platforms. Just search Twice Nightly the Podcast and we will pop up. Also, don't forget to leave us a speak pipe, www.speakpipe.com/Twice Nightly the Podcast, if you want to have your say, or if you want to leave us a comment, or if you want to ask us anything about ourselves or anything that you'd like to see us cover on the podcast. Woof!
Do you know what's something that I need to also advertise, because it was advertised last week in Gareth's episode?
What?
My hits on LinkedIn went up this week, and I'm wondering
You're
whether
joking.
because last week we were talking about LinkedIn, and I'm not joking. Maybe it's a coincidence. Who knows? But
You are joking.
Yeah, I'm the last person with LinkedIn.
Well, I got 3 new friends on MySpace, so.
So if you want to add us on LinkedIn, I'm there too.
All that's left for us to say is...
See you next week.
I must try and find a copy of that. Would it be on Amazon, do you think?
No, that'll be so expensive now.
No, it will.
You've got no chance. Simon's going to have to leave it to you in his will.